In my spear is my bread. In my spear is my fine wine. I lean on my spear and I drink. These are the words of Archilochos, mid-7th century poet. He was a mercenary. His spear is how he made his living. Let's take a look at how we use a spear. This is the Dory, or Doru. This is the war spear of the Greek hoplite. Now, I broke the tip off this one the other day, putting it into a shield. So it's somewhat dangerous to leave this lying around. But it also shows you how these things can break. At the back end, I have a bronze soritor. This bronze soritor acts as a counterweight. That means that the balance for this shaft is not in the middle of the shaft somewhere. It's actually around here. Even with the head on, it's still only around here. This is a fine, light iron point, perfect for piercing. This spear is also tapered. It's about 1.5 inches here, down to 3/4 of an inch in the front, which is one of the reasons why they broke. But one of the things that you can do with this spear is you can hold it close to the rear, because it's balanced close to the rear. If you hold it back here, it gives you extra reach. So I have very little spear coming out behind me, and a lot of spear coming out in front of me. What this means is it's less likely I'm going to stab the guy behind me, and I have a lot of reach against the guy in front of me. Now, I can make this even better. What I can do is I can hold the spear not only close to the rear, but I can also hold it at an angle. And if I hold this spear at an angle like this, you can see I can never hit the head of the man behind me. It's higher than his head as long as it's sticking behind me. When I go forward to strike, it comes down, but it's not going to hit the head of the man behind me. The key to using this spear in formation is you have to use it overhead, and you have to use it at an angle like this. There's a couple reasons why you want to hold it at an angle like this. First reason is that if I'm looking at this balance point, I can do something which is I can hold it behind the balance point. And what that's going to do now is it's going to put a lot of torque on my arm here, on my wrist. This is why people will tell you don't hold one behind the balance point, because it's a lot harder to hold it up behind the balance point. This is actually somewhat difficult. But you don't hold it like this. You let it drop. As you let it drop, the physics involved is such that the leverage of holding it up lessens. So if I do this, it's more difficult. If I do this, it's less difficult. Second reason, if I hold it like this, and I want to parry a spear coming at me, I now have huge range of parry possibilities. Almost like a windshield wiper. I can go back and forth and parry spears coming at my face. And for hoplites, the face is where you're most likely to get hit. But I want to show you one more thing about this spear before I go on to take up my shield and show you how to use it in spear and shield combat. And that is, this is my spear. This is the reach of my spear. I'm fighting a foe at that reach, right? This reach is called a measure. And we're going to talk a lot about measure and when I talk about how we fight. But an important thing for you to realize when you look at the Greek panoply is my spear is that long. If my spear breaks, I have my sword, and look, it's held right up high under my armpits, easy to get to, even with my shield. But when I pull it, my spear is this long. I cannot fight the man that is being fought by the man standing next to me. I cannot hit that enemy line if my friends here are fighting with their spears. What that means is I either stand there and parry, which I can do, I'm no hero, or I have to get in close. And if I get in close, now I'm shield on shield with my foes. And when I'm shield on shield with my foes, this becomes a vicious little knife. I'm in a vicious little knife fight. That vicious little knife fight ends in everyone cramming together and pushing each other and just crowding. And that is called the thysmos, but we'll talk about that in another video. So now I'm going to show you how to use the spear and the shield. This is my aspis. This is an Argive aspis. This one weighs about 16 pounds. Generally, I'd say they weighed more like 13 pounds. I wouldn't go to war with one that weighed more than 14 pounds. So this is a larger aspis than necessary. It's the right dimensions though. This is about a yard wide. You can see my blazon will give you an indication of which way my arm is held underneath. Right now, that blazon is level and my arm is held like that. My arm is in the porpax, which is the cuff that goes around your forearm, and I'm holding this grip here, which is contiguous with the antilabi, which is this rope that goes around the inside. The beautiful thing about this is if I were to try to hold this shield in my hand, I could do so for about 2 minutes before I'd have to put it down. But I can hold it on my forearm like this for a long period of time. This is in fact why I believe they invented this double gripped shield. Right now what's happening is the weight of the shield is actually hanging from my bicep rather than pulling my hand down. So I can stand like this just on that middle grip for a long period of time. And early hoplites probably did this. They stood in lines like this with all of their friends lined up beside them, and behind them were lighter troops, sometimes what they called naked troops, who would shoot arrows or throw spears, shoot slings, or even just throw rocks. Hoplites themselves had spears back then that were not like that large war spear I showed you. They were shorter, and more importantly, they were not so rear balanced. You held them closer to the middle. And what that let you do is throw them. And that's why they held probably two. So they either held two of these throwing spears, or one throwing spear and one larger battle spear. But standing in line like this with your shield, holding your spear, cursing at the enemy for the most part, you were something like 25 meters away, closer than people realized. You could have been 15 meters away, and just yelling at each other. And every now and then, you only had two spears, so you'd throw one. You wouldn't throw your last spear though. There's actually a text from the Viking era that warns that it's actually a medieval text that warns that you not throw your last spear. And it says you don't do that because a spear is worth 2 swords when you're in a shield wall. And that's probably the same for these guys. So they would throw one of their spears, but their last spear they'd hold on to. And why would they do that? Because after they go through this throwing phase, where everyone's throwing things and cursing at each other, eventually everyone would charge in. And when everyone charged in, they're not running from that far away now. They would charge in and they would stop, and as they stopped, they'd give one good smack. That was their best, hardest smack they were going to give. The problem with it is in doing that, they were actually exposing themselves a lot. So once you give a good smack like that, you get turtled up behind your shield. You can see now in the proper dueling position, the shield is covering me from my eyes down to my knees. Almost nothing is exposed. I can turn it a little more like this, turn it a little more like this, do a range of motion here, and it's presenting an angled surface for blows to come off of. It makes it much harder for him to penetrate the shield. And as you recall, I told you that my spear broke off in a shield. You can penetrate a shield. So you can put a spear through an aspis enough to hit the forearm beneath it. So you have to be careful to keep it angled like this in single combat. When you're fighting in a phalanx like this, it's much more difficult for men to get the strength to really penetrate a shield in a shield wall when you're standing up like this. So it's less likely the spear is going to go all the way through and hit your arm. But remember, you still can't hit a shield, you can't prod a shield, because even a slight prod of a shield will stick in that shield, and then I will control your weapon and you will die. So when we think about spear fighting, there are 3 things that you have to consider. The first is measure. And measure is how far I can reach with my spear comfortably to strike. So when I am going to duel with another hoplite, the first thing I do is figure out what his measure is. How far away do I need to be so that I'm just out of range of his strikes? And that's where I want to stand. I stand just out of his measure. Now, the way we duel is that we stay just outside of each other's measures, and then we take a step into measure to strike, and then back outside of measure. We can feint by going like slightly into measure and fake striking, right? And we do that to try to open him up and move his shield and give us an opening to strike with. But when we're doing this, it looks a lot like a dance. We're both outside of each other's measure, and we're jumping into strike and jumping back out, jumping into strike and jumping back out. This dance is what you could consider sort of the timing or the tempo of the bout. Now I'm not using that term correctly. I'm sure some fencer out there is going to take offense at this, but for our purposes, there's a dance going on between me and another hoplite, and we are striking and coming back, striking and coming back. And what I want to do is stay out of his measure, dance into his measure to strike him, don't stay in his measure long enough for him to strike me, and most importantly, I need to have an opening to hit him, because obviously if we're just trading fake blows or even real blows that are just from outside of measure, I need to change things up. So if we are in a duel and we're striking at each other, there's a back and forth that goes on between us. I'm feinting to his knee, feinting to his face, feinting to his knee, feinting to his face, maybe feint to his knee twice, right? And one thing I can do is break the rhythm of this dance we're doing. And if I break the rhythm, often that's enough to open him up to a strike. So if I strike for the knee, strike for the face, strike for the knee, strike for the face, strike for the knee, strike for the knee, right? That's enough sometimes that he has not recovered properly because he's kind of been lulled into this rhythm of us going back and forth. I break the rhythm and then I have a chance to get a strike in. The other important thing to remember is your line of attack, because the spear is, for hoplite, a linear weapon. There are other styles in which spears are cutting weapons, not for hoplites. Hoplites, their spears are stabbing weapons. And my attack is linear. This and back, this and back. Now, this makes it very fast. This jab is probably the fastest strike that you can do with, maybe I'd put it up against any weapon. It's a very fast strike. Very fast strike. Recovery is simple. And because of that, you're going on a line like this. And if you're on this line, what you want to do in order to hit him is move offline, right? So if you're on line and you can do an offline step like this, you have a chance of hitting him somewhere where he's not expecting it and he's not covered, right? Even better is if you can marry that up to a parry. So one of my favorite moves is called, by the Bolognese master Marrozzo, it's called punto reverso. And what you're doing is you're taking your spear, and remember, our spears hang like this. I'll explain to you why they hang like this. What this allows you to do, though, is parry very well. You also won't hit your helmet if you hold it like this. You'll parry very well. Now, if I'm parrying like this, and his blade comes in, I parry it to the side, and now in the parry, I take my step and I'm offline. And now when I come back, I'm hitting his exposed right side. And you see that he and I are almost like mirror images. You see how exposed I am in this strike? I can hit him in the chest, I can hit him in the thigh, I can hit him in the upper chest, the face, of course, again. This is probably the best strike if you want to hit somebody in the body, because you have to go opposite side from the shield. If you do it to the other side, you can do it, and maybe you'll get around to the upper thigh, maybe to the side of the neck and the face, but the way this shield is positioned, you're never going to get around and hit him in the body. This whole side of my body is protected by my shield, and that's part of the beauty of the shield, right? My left side of my body is essentially off limits, from my head to my, just above my knee, all right? Take a break for a second. Now let's talk about measure for a second, because the spear is a weapon that lives and dies by measure. You will see, I see this all the time. If you give a guy a spear and no shield, he will fight with his spear with two hands, and he'll make sure he stays far away from his opponent and parry his opponent with his spear and all these kind of things. If you give him a spear and a shield, he will eventually smash into his opponent like this and attempt to fight his opponent at this range with a spear. This is not how spears are meant to be used. A spear's advantage is its range. You live and die by this range. And the other thing a spear can do is I can alter the range in a way that no sword or other weapon really could. So if this was a sword and I had a reach of, let's say, this far holding my sword, I couldn't do much. I could grab it by the blade, right? I could actually use two hands on it, which they would do to shorten this reach. Or I could maybe hold it a little back by the pommel, but I'm really gaining not very much. But with a spear, I can take this spear and I can fight at my comfortable range, but I also have surprise measure. So here's my comfortable range here, my normal measure, striking, right? But I can also do this, right? I can also, if he comes in on me, I don't have to just let him push my spear aside. If I'm parried and he comes in on me, let's say it's a swordsman, he comes in on me, I do this, right? It's unbalanced now, it's not great, but I can still. So let me teach you another thing about striking. When you're striking, remember, we'll put a couple things together. Here's my spear, which I'm holding behind the balance point, so it wants to fall, but I'm letting it fall. I gain that extra reach. I can go from here, and if I want to surprise him with a little bit extra measure, I do that, right? That's a surprise that I can pull off. It's really easy to do with these spears. It'll keep them honest. When we ran group experiments of multiple ranks of men fighting multiple ranks, the third rank were just deadly with that slide. Just deadly, because you can't see it coming, and it's really quick and fast. And that's an advantage you have with the spear over other weapons. But the other thing that's important is how you strike. So if you guys learned how to hit things back when your coach was teaching you baseball, then you learned that what you want to do is step into your strike and roll your hip into your strike and roll your bat out into the strike, right? And this gives you a really hard hit. So you would step into your strike and roll into it like this, right? That gets you killed with a weapon like a sword or a spear. Why? Because I am leading with my face, right? I am leading my strike with my face. You can't do that. You have to strike in what the swordsmen call true time. And what that means is the fastest part has to move first, and the fastest part better be the weapon. So if I'm jabbing, I can just do that, and I'll do that a lot actually, right? But if I'm going to commit to a thrust, I still have to start it with this jab. So if I'm going to commit to a full thrust now, it starts with the jab and it ends with the feet. So it starts with the jab and ends with the feet, right? If I don't do it that way, and I'm not leading with the weapon, if he counter strikes, my weapon is not in place to block. So it has to start with the weapon and end with the feet. Another thing that is interesting that you can learn from the swordsman is that your measure is always greatest from your shoulder. So if I strike, this is my longest strike from my shoulder out like this, right? If I then lower my arm, let's get back so you can see it. If I lower my arm like this, you can see as I go through a range of motion, this is the longest range of motion, this is less so. So if I go to hit the knee and he goes to hit my face, he's going to win because he can hit my face before I can hit his knee. So you always have to be conscious of that when you're going low. You still have to go low because you have to open up his face. But you have to be conscious of the fact that in swordsmanship, the parry for a strike is just to pull the legs back, because swordsmen know that if he goes for your knees and you're going for his face, he's going to hit you in the face and you're not going to get hit in the knees. Keep that in mind when you're doing these strikes to the legs. You have to play with your measures. So sometimes if I'm taking a strike to the knee, that might be a time where I would slide, right? If I'm taking a strike to the face, that's a great high percentage strike. It's an easy target. But if I miss, my spear is now way out of line, right? And it becomes harder for me to parry. There is one trick though, and this is the last reason why I hold my spear behind the point of balance. If I hold my spear at the point of balance, and my spear gets parried offline, and I pull it back, my spear stays in the position that it's in, right? My point is over there somewhere. You can easily get jammed up like this and you're useless at that point. But if I hold it behind the point of balance, and I strike, and my spear gets parried offline, when I pull it back, if I just don't hold it super tight, it comes back online. Why? Because like an arrow or a dart, that heavy end wants to follow the trail of my hand, like this. So if I'm parried offline, all I do is step back and pull it up, right? Which is great, because if you're doing your proper maintenance of your measure and you're striking, the recovery from a parried strike with overhand in the held behind the balance point is immediate. It's happening as fast as you can step back.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
So, how to use a kopis in battle? If you are fighting in a phalanx, your kopis is going to be, your shield is going to be like this. Your kopis is going to be raised with your elbow behind your shield, ready to strike out. You can strike out over the shield like this, right? You can strike out over the shield like this. You can't really do this very well, right? But the strikes you're going to do will be things like overhead strikes, here, here. These strikes, down on the skull, across from your own left shoulder, right? But in a duel, everything opens up because we hold our shields like this. So now when I'm holding my shield like this, you can see my point is just barely outside my shield. I keep my hand hidden. My hand is totally protected. So when we're talking about fighting with ranks of Persian spearmen, they would have formed a long line, a barricade, just like the Greeks would have, a shield wall. And they would have been behind this shield wall, stabbing at the Greeks over the top of the shield wall. And it would have been about this high. So they would have been covered up to their noses by their shields, and they would have had to fight over the top. Your target now would essentially just be the heads of the men on the other side of the shields. This was daunting for the Greeks. It's clear from the way that the histories are written that the Greeks had to fight through this shield wall. They tried a number of things to get these shield walls to break. Eventually they did break through them, and once they broke through them, the weakness of the Persian system is that the ranks behind these large shields either had small shields or no shields, and at that point they were not equipped to fight hoplites. But this first barricade of shields was something that was able to stand up to hoplites, and they'll talk about the shields being, the spears being shorter. I don't think that's the case. You can see from artwork that they're not substantially shorter. You can also see from artwork that they have heavy counterweights at the back, which meant they could have increased their reach. So even if after the battle I stood up a Persian spear next to a Greek spear, the reach of that Persian spear might have been the same even if the length was shorter. The other thing to consider is that these Persian shield walls were contiguous. Sometimes they're actually put on a kickstand while the Persian himself was shooting his bow. It was possible these things were designed not to be mobile at all. They would build a contiguous shield wall, and essentially it was like a wall, and they fought over the top. Greeks, on the other hand, can step out of a phalanx. It wouldn't seem obvious, but the overlapping shields in a phalanx, you can just open up your shield and step out of a phalanx. So it's possible that Greeks were adding a step to their strikes in a way that the Persians couldn't. And that alone may have accounted for their belief that the Persians couldn't reach them with their spears because they were shorter. Like this. Really easy, just pop it off the shoulder and bring it up, right? I can actually do this in a really crowded phalanx as well, because I can raise my arm up and then let it fall forward. And you can see I can do this in the space of my own body. And I can bring it out and fight. So when these men are running into, and if we take things back to the beginning, there are two things you need to know. One is measure, and the other is this train. This is a hoplite spear, the Dory, or Doru. This example is what they would have used somewhere near the mid to end 5th century, early 4th century. It's long. This one is around a little over 8 feet long. It has a heavy serrature of brass at the back, and a small fine point at the front.